What Mass should I attend? Where should I?
The new Mass of Paul VI, as I explained, is against the teaching of the Church. And Our Lady of Fatima warned against making these changes in the Mass precisely because it is the infallible teaching of the Church that the Church is bound, the Pope is bound to the traditional rite, the rite handed down. This is the dogma of our Catholic faith. The Church is bound. And that's why the profession of faith binds the Catholic to the traditional rites. Explicitly. There's no doubt about it. Nor can there be any doubt that the new rite of Mass of Paul VI is a new rite. It is not the Roman rite. It is a new rite. There's all kinds of mincing of words that has been coming out of Rome on this point. But the men who created it said it's a new rite. And Paul VI, when he announced it, he said it is a new rite of Mass. So, as best as you can, and you can ask, there are people who can tell you, they can instruct, they can give you particulars, and I can't give you particulars, but I can tell you, you go to where you find the traditional teaching and the traditional rite of Mass. There are many. There are more than you are aware of who are providing the sacraments according to the traditional rites. Some are diocesan, some are religious orders, but there are too many different ones in different parts of the world that I can't go into the particulars on that. But in general, in principle, that's what is to be followed. You look for the traditional teaching, you look for the traditional liturgy.
One thing that Father and I spoke about before we started this conference was, and Father and I have been in the traditionalist movement in the Philippines for some years now, we've noticed that there are many false apparitions, false messages, etc. Father, I think would like to make some comments, and this I think he will go into particulars, like, for instance, Father Gobi, Maria Divine Mercy, Bayside. So I'll give the mic back to Father, because it's not only important to realize what we should do. He has given you the general guidelines, but even the traditionalist movement in the Philippines is infected. Father?
Our religion is a dogmatic religion, which means it is by the authority of the Church, which speaks with the authority of God, infallibly defining what is our faith, what we must believe. And so if there is some private revelation that deviates on one single point of doctrine, if it's contrary to the Catholic teaching, we must reject the whole thing as false. It is impossible that any of the saints, or the Mother of God, or Jesus Christ could reveal to us something that is 99% true, but also containing errors against the Catholic faith. Would you drink the most exquisite wine if it were 99% pure and 1% poison? Of course not. The revelations, so-called, made to Father Gobi, Father Stefano Gobi, are a perfect example of that. So many of the things in the messages of Father Gobi seem to be very much on target and correct. But then in the mid-1990s, I remember reading in the official publication of the Gobi Revelations, where supposedly it is Our Lady saying that the triumph of my Immaculate Heart will take place in the year 2000. She didn't say it will begin, it will start, just begin to happen. And no, she said it will take place in the year 2000. Now, the world is on the verge of war. The Church is being attacked from within. We see the fulfillment of the Book of Lamentations, where it says, all the kings of the world and the people of the earth could not believe that their adversary and enemy has entered in through the gates of Jerusalem, which means to say that the enemy within the gate has taken over. Monsignor Mario Marini, who was the secretary of the Ecclesiastical Commission, he said to me, our hands are tied, we can do nothing because it is Masons who occupy the key positions. And the last time I spoke to him before he died, he said, we are under Masonic occupation. Now, this is a man who worked more than 40 years in the Vatican. And that's how he summed it up. We are under Masonic occupation. Father, Monsignor Mario Marini. Yes. So, we have to beware, especially of when people like Father Gobi will say the triumph will take place in the year 2000. The church is under Masonic occupation. We have this Jorge Bergoglio who is teaching Masonic doctrine. The man who's supposed to be teaching Catholic doctrine is teaching Masonic doctrine, deceiving souls with this most diabolical deception. This is the operation of error, the mystery of iniquity embodied in this man who's teaching error and scandal against the Catholic faith. This is not the triumph of the Immaculate Heart of Mary. And then Gobi goes on further. Gobi's revelation says that Christ is going to come down and rule on earth. Now this is an ancient heresy, condemned as a heresy. And this is supposedly Our Lady speaking through Father Gobi, teaching heresy. Well, we know that Our Lady would never teach heresy. She's the Mother of God. She's the seat of wisdom. She's the mother of the incarnate divine truth himself. She couldn't possibly teach error. She couldn't possibly lead souls to hell with hellish doctrines. Gobi is false. Maria Divine Mercy is another one. Mary McGovern Carberry is her name. Her name is not Maria Divine Mercy. Her name is Mary McGovern Carberry. And she was an occultist, and she was a businesswoman, and she got into the business of making money on prophecy. And she's taught quite a number of heresies. You can find it very easily if you just type in the search engine, Maria Divine Mercy heresy. You're going to find plenty of heresies. Specific heresies. Our Lady cannot possibly teach heresy. She's the seat of wisdom, the Mother of Christ, the Mother of God. She can only teach truth. She's the Mother of the Church. How could she teach the doctrine of the devil? But Maria Divine Mercy teaches doctrines of the devil, mixing them in with some very true-sounding things. Again, it's like the exquisite wine that's 99% pure. But that's how the devil seduces people into error. Make it sound really good, and then mix in the poison. And that's Maria Divine Mercy. Bayside is another. Watch out for Bayside. There is all kinds of distraction and nonsense there. But when Our Lady speaks, what she teaches is cut and dry. Those who've read The Third Secret of Fatima say her words are cut and dry. Father Père Lamy, Father Lamy, who Our Lady spoke with him, and he was asked, well, what are her words like? And he said, Our Lady's words are always very precise. Look at the Bayside Revelations. They're rambling all over the place. This is unworthy of God. This is unworthy of the Mother of God. And there are errors there. And the church has condemned those things for error, whether it be Bayside and this. More forcefully, the bishops of Slovakia have condemned Maria Divine Mercy for heresy, because these doctrines have been, through the internet, been infecting the Catholic people in Slovakia, and the bishops of Slovakia denounced Maria Divine Mercy for heresy. And the heresies are plain. The heresies are patent. There's no doubt about it. Those people who insist on following the Maria Divine Mercy are rebellious against God, against His Holy Church, because the doctrine of the faith is clearly infallibly taught by the Church, and Maria Divine Mercy teaches against the infallible teaching of the Church, and so does Gobi.
Father, okay, I am a firm believer of Our Lady of the Roses. By the way, I was able to attend Latin like that because of her intercession. And okay, to make it short, I was able to make my parish to restore the altar railing, so thousands of people are because of the intercession of Our Lady of the Roses. Now, yes, Father, I've been asking question.
Sorry. Okay, ulit mo yung tanong.
Father, because I can understand what Our Lady will not be silent during this time, so she must give some counsels to her children. That's why I understand all what is written in the Our Lady of the Roses. Okay, especially now we have a season, something like that, great season. Now, Father, one question: do you believe the prophecy of Saint Malachi that Pope Benedict XVI is the second to the last Pope, and then the last Pope is the Pope Petrus Romanus Fabian? That's all.
We can't even be sure that we have the entire prophecies of Saint Malachi in their original condition. These were found in the Vatican Library hundreds of years after his death, so we can only speculate if there is more to St. Malachi's prophecies than what we actually have, or if this is incomplete in the present state that we have them. Again, the prophecies of saints can be incomplete. Some of them are not always entirely accurate, so it would not be wise to quote the prophecies and private revelations of the saints as if they were coming from the mouth of God, being set forth in the clear teaching of sacred Scripture, which they are not. What we believe as Catholics is what the Church has defined, what has been revealed by God in the deposit of revelation, contained in Scripture and tradition. And that which is contained in Scripture and tradition is set forth by the Catholic Church, is that which we must believe for our salvation. And when we find particular elements in private revelations like Bayside that are contrary to what is set forth by the Church in the deposit of revelation, we know that the Church teaches that which is good must be completely good, free from error. That which is evil, what was not good, is to be judged as evil if it has even one error. Bonum ex integro, malum ex placumque defectu. That's the Church's standard in making judgment. If there is so much as one error, it could be 10 volumes long of revelations. It can all sound very good. If there is one error in those revelations, it is to be rejected. It's not of God. It is on this point that A faithful Catholic has no option but to reject the Bayside revelations. They are not 100% true, and therefore they are to be judged as not being of God, not being supernatural. And this was the judgment that was made by the Sacred Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith under Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger. It's not just the Diocese of Brooklyn, but when the Diocese of Brooklyn condemned the alleged apparitions of Bayside, you will see it was done after consultation with the Sacred Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, which in canon law means the condemnation is not just made by the local diocese, but the condemnation is made by the authority, the papal authority exercised, delegated to the prefect of the Sacred Congregation at the time, Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger. So it is Rome that has condemned Bayside, not just the local bishop.
I would like to reiterate that our attitude should be an attitude of humility. What is humility? It is the truth. We do not have the capability, sometimes even the brains, to discover error. We do not have it. The moment we try, nagmamagaling tayo, we fall into error. Whereas we have 2,000 years of an inheritance called the Tridentine Mass, called the teachings of the saints, all Alphonsus Liguori. If let's say Basilio did nothing but read Saint Alphonsus Liguori, the glories of Mary, for the rest of his life and put that into practice, well, Father Kramer and I will agree that Basilio will go to heaven.
I'll give you an example of the deception in the Bayside messages. The so-called Lady of the Roses says that Holy Communion must not be distributed by deacons. Now this is perverse. This is a perverse teaching. The great abuse is the lay ministers, the Eucharistic ministers. You have lay people who are handing out communion.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, we look to the ancient tradition of the church. We recall there was a deacon by the name of Saint Tarcissus, a martyr. It was he who took the Blessed Sacrament to give in Holy Communion to the sick. This is the ancient discipline of the church. The deacons distribute Holy Communion. They are ordained with the sacrament of holy orders that makes them ministers of the Eucharist. But the Lady of the Roses says nothing against the abuse of lay ministers giving communion. But she says that it's the deacons who must not be distributing communion. This is a diabolical perversion of the Church's teaching, and that comes straight out of the mouth of the so-called Lady of the Roses.
The other thing I want to point out about private messages, you ask yourself the basic question: do you need a private message for your salvation?
No.
The quick answer to that is no. Because what is Christian life? Keeping the commandments, prayer, sacraments, the Mass, good works, and persevering in that. In other words, if you did nothing for the rest of your life except that, you'll get to heaven. In other words, nobody's going to ask you, did you receive the private message? No, you're not going to be judged on that. Christian life is actually very simple, and keep it at that. Keep it simple. In other words, what we have inherited, the magic formula, Jane was asking, what are we going to do in specifics? Quick answer. What Catholics were doing around 1960 or before 1960, simply restore that. The Novena to Baclaran, the devotion to Nazareno, your Sunday Tridentine Mass, your Rosary, your Way of the Cross, do good works, do charitable works, stay away from temptation and sin. That's it, di ba? Sure ball na yun. Why contaminate it? Next question.
Father, I watched a YouTube video of John
I think John Veneri and Father Gruner, they talked about this about Putin asking the consecration of, or not necessarily the consecration of Russia, but asking Pope Francis concerning something of Fatima. And also, Father Gruner mentioned that they're trying to divide the papacy. Or can you expound on those topics, or is there anything that you can say about them?
Mr. Putin is interested in the message of Fatima and the consecration of Russia because Our Lady promised that by this means Russia will be saved and peace will be given to the world, and that if this consecration is done, world war would be avoided. Mr. Putin wants so much to avoid war, but he believes that the Western leaders are behaving like men who are demon-possessed because they are provoking Russia, they are ganging up on Russia, they are wrongfully accusing Russia when it is the Western powers who are committing the greatest evils. They're arming the Islamic militants, completely overthrown the order that there was in the Middle East, no matter how imperfect it was. It is not to be compared with the evil of the chaos and the carnage that is taking place. And the Western powers have been financing it, the butchers of Christians in the Middle East. Mr. Putin has on record, he publicly declared that it's his intention to defend the Christians, these Christians who are being slaughtered. So he knows that Our Lady of Fatima promises peace. He wants peace. He doesn't want to. The Western powers are trying to overthrow Russia, and what they did, the way they overthrew Ukraine, the way they overthrew Georgia, and they bring in these pro-Western governments who are just satellites and tools of the CIA and the British intelligence. And they want to do the same thing with Russia. They want to destabilize and overthrow the elected government of Russia and put in some puppet dictator who will serve Western interests. And Mr. Putin will not stand for this, and if it means war, he will even resort to war to prevent Russia from being overthrown. But he doesn't want war, he wants peace. And the peaceful solution is the one offered by Our Lady of Fatima. And that's why Mr. Putin is so greatly interested in that, and if it can be implemented, he is all for it. In fact, I'll add one thing. I know from my channels that when Bergoglio refused to discuss Fatima, he said, "We will not discuss Fatima." The feedback is, and this comes from the most unimpeachable sources in the Kremlin, Mr. Putin considered himself to have been snubbed by this Francis Bergoglio for having said that.
Good evening, Father. This is my privilege to see you now. So I believe what you have written in your different books. So what is the third secret of Fatima? Do you have any idea?
As I mentioned, Our Lady spoke in the third secret, warning against changing the Mass, warning against the evil counsel. The third secret of Fatima warns about what will take place if Our Lady's requests are not carried out. And what will take place? That was already warned against by Pope St. Pius X. They will set up a one-world religion. There will be the institutionalization of tyranny. There will be nothing but oppression and slavery for the poor and the working classes. Pope Benedict XV warned in 1920 against those most evil of men in the world who want to establish in the world a one world republic, a one world government, a one world republic. And he said that in so doing they will establish a reign of terror on the earth. Our Lady of Fatima warns that if her requests are not carried out, that those things that the popes have warned against, the one world government, a tyranny, a one world government of tyranny, of slavery, and a diabolical one world religion will be imposed on the world. And there will be even worse things. There are worse things than that in the secret. Go ahead.
Good evening, Father. During your first talk in the Max restaurant, you mentioned that Our Lady likened the popes to a serpent and a chameleon. Is there any more another description?
Those are the two I remember. Exactly how many Our Lady speaks of, I don't know for sure. I'd have to talk again with the people where this originated from, and I really don't have the means to fly around the world to ask these people again. But I'm going by memories from what I can recall was said in conversations. So I do remember Our Lady did compare the conciliar popes to certain animals, one a serpent, one a chameleon, and if there's some others I just don't recall. Another apparition that one must really watch out for, avoid like the plague, is the so-called Lady of all Nations.
Oh yes, exactly.
This shows you how great is the deception in the world. All over the Philippines, you see in the parishes images in the churches, and this is being promoted. Also, all over Ireland, I see the same thing being promoted. Now, this apparition of the Lady of all Nations has been condemned 3 times. The Holy Office, under Pius XII, condemned it twice. And then in 1961, by the order of Pope John the 23rd, it was condemned again. Again, according to canon law, that means it's not just the delegated authority of the Holy Office that's condemning, but it is, canonically, it is a condemnation of the Pope himself. John the 23rd ordered it to be condemned. I personally went to the Sacred Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, that used to be called the Holy Office, because I wanted a clarification. I said, Catholics all over the world are asking me this question, and I have to get an answer. And that means you have to give me an answer, because usually they don't. If a bishop is asking, a bishop of a diocese is asking, they will provide him with an answer. But not every person who walks into the congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith can always expect to be given an answer for every question they have. But I told them, look, I must be given an answer because I'm in contact with Catholics all over the world. It's again and again and again the Catholics are asking me, what is the position of the Church on this? And I had the notations in my hand of the documents, the 3 condemnations of the all nations apparitions. And that official, a Spanish-based, I've forgotten his name, Miguel something or other, but this official of the Sacred Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith said, oh, those documents that you have in your notes, all three, they're still in force. The condemnations are still in force. Now, with good reason, because Our Lady, the so-called Lady, the Lady of all nations, is an Arian heretic. The heresy of Arius. She says, or I should say, it says, this demon that masquerades as Our Lady, this demon lady of all nations says, the Redeemer received his divinity from my Lord and Master. This is the most outrageous heresy. God is Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Each person is co-equal and co-eternal. The Holy Ghost does not receive his divinity from the Father and the Son does not receive his divinity from the Father. All three are co-eternal, equally God, equally eternally God. So, when our Lord assumed our human flesh through a hypostatic union, through his human nature, the human flesh he took from his most holy mother, that humanity is united to the divinity of his person, and that divine person is infinitely, eternally, equally God with the Father. He did not receive his divinity. Yet, the Lady of all nations says, the Redeemer received his divinity from my Lord and Master. My only question to that so-called Lady of all nations is, who is your Lord and Master?
Anybody else? Please, Clara.
But by saying someone else is her Lord and Master, obviously her Lord and Master is not our Lord Jesus Christ.
Further, with all the comments being given by our Pope, like, for example, if you can, God gave you the conscience to look for other means of not having as many children, etc., etc. And lately, you see the Holy Father embracing and inviting all of this transgender people. And so when you start also talking to other people that, yes, you can pray for them, you can have compassion, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to tell them to tolerate it. And so you become also a contrabida in Philippine setting, what with the Pope who has been here and very popular. So they would tell you, even the Pope himself says that we should love all people, we should accept all people for what they are. So I don't know how you really approach, you said we are a dogmatic church. So I really don't know how to approach telling friends that you can have mercy, you can have compassion, but you don't have to tell them that they can go on with relationships like this. What then should we people who are more enlightened do except pray?
Pray, yes, but also we must bear witness to our Catholic faith, which means we must oppose those teachers of error, no matter who they are. St. Robert Bellarmine says, even if the Pope were to be, in his words or actions, attacking the faith, then we must resist him, and we must oppose him, we must thwart his will. So we don't work to make his intentions, to realize his intentions, to materialize his intentions. We work to prevent the fulfillment of his intentions. We work against, if there is a Pope who is attacking the faith, we must uphold the Catholic faith. We must bear witness to the Catholic faith, and we must work against him. This is the approved teaching of the Church. This is the teaching of the doctor of the Church, St. Robert Bellarmine, in his great treatise on the Roman Pontiff, De Romano Pontifice. So, the Church has approved this doctrine as what we must do when a Pope were to teach error, to oppose the Catholic faith. Pope Innocent III says, if a Pope were to wither away into heresy, although the Pope can not be judged by anyone, by men, but he's judged by God alone, yet that is not the case. If a Pope were to wither away into heresy, he can be judged by men, or rather, he can be shown to be already judged, because the unbeliever is already judged, and such a one is to be cast out and trampled underfoot by men. This is the teaching of Pope Innocent III on what is to be done if there is a heretical Pope. Then there is the further complication. There are two men in the Vatican, both calling themselves in some manner Pope. It's commonplace. People say, well, Pope Benedict resigned his office. Well, you read carefully his declaration. He doesn't use the word resign, and he doesn't say he resigns to office. He says what he resigns is the active exercise of the Petrine ministry. He says he received both that active and passive exercise of the office of the Pope on the 19th of April 2005. And he renounces the active exercise of the Petrine ministry, but he says that does not, but then he says, describing the passive munus, the ministry, the passive ministry of the Pope, the praying and suffering for the flock, he says, that is not revoked. Now, in his words, both in the declaration and he clarified in his final audience on the 27th of February 2013, his words were so clear that the canon law professor Stefano Violi of the theological faculty of Lugano and the theology faculty of Reggio Emilia, he wrote an article published in the Theological Journal of Lugano, explaining very meticulously, parsing through the words of Pope Benedict, analyzing the text to show exactly what Benedict said. What was he renouncing? What was he not renouncing? And he made it very clear that he's not renouncing the office of papacy. He's renouncing the active exercise of the ministry, retaining that passive exercise of the ministry, which he exercises within the enclosure of St. Peter, to use his exact words, within the Recinto di San Pietro. So he made it very clear that he was not giving up the papacy entirely, but more dividing it the way the Pope would divide the governance of a diocese, as happened in Cebu when Cardinal Rosales was getting old, and so Pope John Paul appointed a coadjutor with the power to govern the diocese, with the right of succession. But Cardinal Rosales still remained nominally, and in fact, the Archbishop of Cebu. but it was the coadjutor who had the power to govern. So it's very clear that what Pope Benedict did was he tried to do the same thing with the papacy as what the popes have done with other dioceses, to divide the office between two men. One who has the title, who retains the office, but passes the power of governance on to a successor. There's a problem with that. Pope Benedict seems to think that he can do that. That was the proposal of his mentor, Karl Rahner, S.J., the one who was the orchestrator of the Second Vatican Council, and the one who was known as Rahner's right arm at the Second Vatican Council was the younger priest, Father Joseph Ratzinger. And it was the proposal of Rahner to reform the papacy in this manner by dividing it between two or more individuals. There's a problem with that. The Church has always taught that the papal office, and the charism of the papal office, is indivisible. It belongs to one man. And this has not even been disputed since it was formulated in 1610 by the great Dominican theologian. He was the most celebrated theologian, the most celebrated Italian theologian of the 1700s, of this, Father Domenico Gravina, with this classic formulation that the papacy, the recipient of those charisms of the infallibility, can only be one and the same person. Cannot be divided. The office cannot be divided. And that creates the problem. Pope Benedict did not fully abdicate, in which case his renunciation would be defective, because he intended in some manner, in some measure, still to be Pope, which means the act was null and void, and that Jorge Bergoglio is not really the Bishop of Rome. He's the former Archbishop of Buenos Aires. This has been summed up very well in a full-length book. The book is called Non è Francesco. It is not Francis. A very well-argued book. He takes the arguments from canon law, the defects that took place in the conclave, and the defects in the very act of renunciation itself by Pope Benedict. And what he didn't even mention in that book, there is yet another defect. According to church law, it is the custom of the Roman Church that any juridical act that contains errors in the Latin text, by that fact alone, is null and void. Pope Benedict's declaration, the actual copy, the actual hard copy that he signed into law, proclaiming his renunciation, has two very glaring errors in the Latin grammar. I'm not going to speculate why are there errors in the Latin. Joseph Ratzinger is a consummate scholar. His knowledge of Latin is impeccable. Why are there errors in the Latin? That's a very good question, and I don't have a definitive answer, but I can tell you this. The new Code of Canon Law of 1983 says very clearly that if there is no new statute to govern a situation, then by law you fall back on the custom or the jurisprudence of the Roman Church. And it goes back almost 1,000 years. We're going back to Pope St. Gregory VII, who ruled that if there's any error in the Latin text of an official juridical act, that act is thereby rendered null and void. So, it is a clear point of law. It's cut and dry. There's no doubt. There are two errors in the Latin. The popes have upheld this kind of ruling down through the centuries. The 1983 Code of Canon Law upholds the jurisprudence and customs of the Roman Curia, and therefore it is absolutely without doubt, because of the grammatical errors in the text of the document, therefore, juridically, it is null and void. It is a null and void act. And so, what Pope Benedict, still being Pope, a conclave, with its own canonical irregularities, alleged canonical irregularities, it's well proven, but the case of the erroneous Latin is cut and dry. There's no doubt about it. Just as the case of the text of the renunciation and Benedict's last audience, there's no doubt about what is his intention. It's his intention to retain the passive aspect of the Petrine office and to renounce the exercise of the power. And if that's not enough, the Latin errors render null and void the very act itself. It's totally null and void. So what we have is Jorge Bergoglio was elected while a sitting pope is still validly in the chair of Peter. And it doesn't matter what Benedict believes. It doesn't matter what, we don't know what, the cardinals I know are grumbling silently, quietly between themselves. They don't speak out publicly yet against Francis. But that doesn't mean the situation won't change. There's going to be a break sooner or later. The dam will burst. But right now, I can only say this much. It doesn't matter what they think. It doesn't matter what Benedict thinks. This is cut and dry canon law. Benedict is still Pope. And no one has refuted these arguments. They complain. I hear people just reject it, and they start screaming about no, that's not true. How can you say this? What authority do you have to say that? And all this nonsense. It's all rubbish. According to canon law, it is very clear. That's the law of the church. In Rome, they don't want, it's distasteful. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to say it. They don't comment, and they don't refute it. They just don't say anything about it. They just go on pretending that the emperor has a new suit of clothes. And one final truth is this. Pope Benedict, as a theologian, has many flaws. His doctrine on the Eucharist, his doctrine on resurrection, his doctrine of the divinity of Christ, seriously flawed, to put it mildly. However, as Pope, he never officially proclaimed those heresies. He, unlike Bergoglio, Benedict has the charism, papal charism. Bergoglio does not. And that's why Bergoglio can drag the whole church into heresy, because he's not a pope, he's a phony pope. He's a counterfeit. And everything he does is calculated, politically motivated. He's a very shrewd, cunning man. He speaks of compassion only to gain political support. What compassion has he shown to the Franciscan Friars of the Immaculate?
Yes.
What compassion has he shown to those who uphold the Catholic faith, who are preoccupied with upholding the purity of Catholic dogma? He berates these people. He criticizes them, berates them, as if it's not important, as if the purity of dogma were not an important point. those who uphold the church's morality. He's busy demolishing through his actions. And as all the great commentators on canon law, this is the position of the church on canon law. How do we judge a heretic? A man demonstrates himself to be a heretic either by his words, by openly teaching against the faith, which Bergoglio has done, or by his actions, and his actions even more so. He has demonstrated that he is a man without faith. He is faithless. What more need I say? I don't believe in a Catholic God. He doesn't believe in the God of Catholic tradition. He believes in a different kind of God. And that's why he seems to have words of praise for Muslims and words of praise for every other religion. He has words, he even speaks well of atheists. The only people who really berate are traditional Catholics. Those who want to uphold our traditions and our morality. Pope Pius XII said, numerous families are the treasure of the church. Bergoglio says, don't be like rabbits. Does he talk this way to Muslims? No way. He shows such respect for Muslims. But the Catholics who uphold our traditional values, don't be like rabbits. I don't believe in a Catholic God. Those who are preoccupied with upholding the purity of dogma, these people are Gnostics. And those who do penitential practices, what did you say they are? I forgot. Pelagians. Oh, Pelagians, yes. He calls them Pelagians. Pelagians. This is ironic, too. This is ironic because Bergoglio says, you do what do you have to do to be saved? Nothing about divine grace, nothing about faith. Yeah. Just do according to your conscience what you think is right, and that's how you get saved. That means by human activity alone, without faith, but by human conscience, you're saved. That's Pelagianism. Bergoglio is a Pelagian. Yet those who want to discipline the flesh in order to save their souls, and practice virtue, he says they're the Pelagians, when he has shown himself to be the Pelagian. That's the irony. Here's this man who has no faith at all. Those people who are upholding the Catholic faith, the Catholic teaching, he calls them Gnostics, he calls them Pelagians. Don't be like rabbits. But on the feast of Ramadan, how respectfully he speaks to the Muslims. He has such respect and deference to the Jews, to the Muslims, but there's only one group that he has contempt for, and those are genuine Catholics. He has contempt for Catholics. Real Catholics, those who uphold the faith and traditions of the church, he has expressed his contempt for them. Bye-bye.
One last question, Father. Can you explain in simple terms the triumph of the Immaculate Heart of Mary?
Very simple terms. It is getting late. Our Lady said, in the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph. The Holy Father will consecrate Russia to me. Russia will be converted, and a period of peace will be given to the world. So that is the triumph. She defines what her triumph will be. In the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph. Okay. So what is that triumph? The consecration of Russia. That will bring about the conversion of Russia, and that will bring about peace in the whole world. That is her triumph.
Father, do you have any word of advice
for all Filipinos and all those other people around the world who seem to be so obsessed with Bergoglio, just like what we have observed here in Manila, here in the Philippines, during the recent quote-unquote papal visit. Do you have any advice for them, Father? Thank you.
As I mentioned before, our religion is a religion of dogma. Our religion is the faith that we have received from the apostles. Our religion is not the cult of personality. We don't worship the Pope. The Pope is not a little god. It is the Shiite Muslims who believe that their Pope was their grand Ayatollah, is like a Pope for them, that their Ayatollah is impeccable and he's inerrant. That means the grand Ayatollah, for them, they believe he cannot commit a sin and he cannot make an error. Now, we mustn't behave like these Muslims. That's a superstition. And we must not have our veneration for a pope, any pope, whether it be Ratzinger, Wojtyła, Montini, or whether it be a false pope like Bergoglio. Our religion is not a cult of personality. The church doctors, even the popes, have taught us that if a pope goes against the teaching of the church, the pope attacks our faith, goes against the teaching of our religion, we are to oppose him. We are to correct him, rebuke him, and resist him. And we're to prevent the execution of his will. This is the teaching of St. Robert Bellarmine, like I mentioned, the teaching of St. Thomas Aquinas. It is the teaching of Pope Innocent III. We already have a pope teaching us how we are to reject popes who attack our faith, to be cast out and trampled underfoot by men. That's clear enough. So, Catholics must not be hanging on every word that comes out of the mouth of a pope, especially if the pope is teaching against the teaching of Jesus Christ, teaching against what the church has defined to be the teaching of Jesus Christ. The church is infallible. That the faith of the church is infallible. The opinions of a pope are not infallible. Only when a pope defines a point of doctrine, which is always what the church has taught, but now specifies it and defines it clearly and solemnly. Not teaching a new doctrine, not teaching contrary to church doctrine, but specifying clearly and defining what the church has always professed and believed. That alone is infallible. It's the Pope's definitions that are infallible. The solemn definitions of a valid Pope are infallible. The non-solemn opinions of a Pope, or especially of an anti-Pope, are not infallible, can be erroneous, and when, like those opinions and expressions of Bergoglio, which are patently, obviously, crudely against Catholic teaching, they are to be rejected. We are to reject those teachings because we know through what the Church has taught down through the ages, in the Roman Catechism, the Catechism of the Council of Trent, in the dogmatic encyclicals of the popes down through the centuries, we have a doctrine that is diametrically the opposite of what Bergoglio is teaching now. And so we follow the teaching of Pope Innocent III, cast him out, trample him underfoot, wishing to say, pay no attention to this man. He's the enemy of our faith because his teachings are patently contrary to the doctrine of Jesus Christ, the apostles, the fathers, the doctors of the church, and the popes.
We'll have one last question from Kyle, and then I will request Father for a 5-minute overview of the Militia Immaculata. Then we'll have a closing prayer because it's getting late. So Kyle.
Again, apologies for this last question, but it concerns, Father, you also mentioned the liturgy and also the traditional rites, the Tridentine Mass. And so basically the question is a Catholic, for example, there are no available traditional Latin Masses in the area. Is a Catholic allowed to attend a solemn Novus Ordo Mass done in the proper way, or in any Novus Ordo Mass available? Is he allowed, or for example, there are no other masses available? Is it doesn't he commit a sin when he attends such masses?
This is a question that has to really, I mean, I can give an answer, but the first thing I have to say, before giving a definitive and final answer, I would have to study this in great depth, which I have not done. I have investigated the questions in some depth, but I would say that, generally speaking, because the Novus Ordo Mass is not just a different liturgy, but it is a liturgy that professes a different faith than our Catholic faith. Subtly, it professes errors. Like I said, in the Good Friday liturgy, the prayer asking God to preserve the Jews in the observance of the covenant. This is diametrically opposed to our Catholic faith. There are so many errors against the Catholic faith, whether represented verbally or symbolically, that the Novus Ordo Mass professes a religion that is different than the Catholic religion. It is as Bishop Richard Williamson said when the representatives of the Society of St. Pius X were meeting with Cardinal Castiglione Hoyos. And Cardinal Castiglione had mentioned to the SSPX representatives that there's not that much that divides us. We have far more in common than what divides us. And Bishop Williamson answered to the Cardinal, "No, Your Eminence, it is not so. There are two different religions." This is why Catholics should avoid the Novus Ordo Mass like the plague. I mean, if somebody's dying, you can get, if you know that the priest is going to bring a validly consecrated host, if you have the moral certitude that in a particular priest, or a particular parish, or a particular priest, that the priests have the faith in principle enough that you know that they're validly consecrating the host, then you can receive the viaticum from them. In an emergency, you can receive the absolution from them. But their Mass is the expression of a false religion. It's the ecumenical religion of Vatican II. It is the new religion of Giovanni Battista Montini. And that's why the Novus Ordo Mass should absolutely be avoided. And if all Catholics had avoided it from the beginning, it would not have lasted very long. In Campos, Brazil, Bishop Castromeyer trained his priests very well. And the priests instructed their parishioners in the catechism very well. Every parish, the people really knew their faith inside and out in the Diocese of Campos. So when the new Mass was instituted, and finally Bishop Castromeyer was replaced, the new bishop, well, even before then, when Bishop Castromeyer resisted Rome, he had the solidarity of all the Catholic people behind him. Then when he retired, a new bishop comes in, and the story is something I'll never forget. In in the book of Dr. David Allen White, The Mouth of the Lion, you read the story how the new bishop came into the cathedral. The cathedral was filled with people, and the new bishop begins the Novus Ordo Mass. And at the very beginning of the Mass, the entire church just empties. Everybody just walks out and leaves. The new bishop of the diocese celebrates the Mass in front of an empty cathedral. If that had been the response in all the dioceses of the world, a very humiliated and embarrassed Paul VI would have withdrawn the Sala Romana. If the Catholics had been steadfast in refusing the new rite, they could not have wrongfully imposed it the way they did. And impose it, they did, and unlawfully. Pope Benedict XVI declared in Sermono Pontificum, the Motu Proprio, that the traditional rite of Mass was never suppressed, that the priests always had the right to celebrate that Mass. Paul VI did something that is against Catholic teaching and against the rights of all the faithful of the world. The option is what has been taught by the Church and taught by the saints down through the ages. We hold fast to the Catholic faith, unswervingly, because, as Saint Vincent of Lerins said, the reason why we must hold fast to antiquity when they come up with new doctrines, when we see people in the Church, like the time of the Arian heresy, Saint Jerome said, the whole world woke up and groaned to find itself Arian. So St. Vincent said, when it appears that the whole church is defecting, what are we to do? We hold fast to antiquity, which means the tradition. The traditional faith, the traditional worship. We hold fast to that because, St. Vincent says, because that antiquity, that cannot be deceived by any lying novelty. The most ancient popes, and Pope Benedict XV, down through the ages, the popes have said, do not innovate, hold fast to tradition. Saint John Chrysostom, whose feast day was just a couple of days ago, said, is it tradition? Ask no more. That's where we find safety, because the Catholic faith is the faith that we received from the apostles, transmitted to us unchanged down through the ages. And the First Vatican Council speaks of, defines the infallibility of the Pope, declaring quite explicitly that the gift of the charism of infallibility was given not so that the Pope could teach any new doctrines, but to define what the Church has always taught. So if even a Pope were to teach new doctrines, well, St. Paul already told us, if anyone comes to you and teaches a gospel different than that which you have received from us, let him be condemned. That is where we find our salvation, in holding fast to the faith that we have received from the apostles.